Welcome to this video on how to configure your Apricot for case management or any direct service program. I appreciate your interest in this topic. Thanks for joining. My name is Jeff Hegwood. I'm an Apricot software consultant at Sidekick Solutions. At Sidekick Solutions, we help new and existing Apricot users make the most of their platforms. We do the heavy lifts in Apricot so you can focus on what matters to you. Today's video is of particular interest to me because I feel strongly about the role client case management software plays in an organization's technology stack. Apricot configuration choices impact user experience, data structure, reporting, and what I've found is that the best way to get the most out of Apricot is to have a few examples and use cases to draw upon. Sharing ideas is the focus of today's video. During this video, we're going to explore the concept behind a universal program enrollment form. I'm going to share 4 ways to track goals in Apricot. I'll demo a client summary report, highlight a few quick hit configuration choices in your Apricot platform, and then wrap up with some key takeaways. All right, let's dive in. Out of the box, Apricot is highly configurable. You can customize Apricot to be your organization's unique case management application. But Apricot's flexibility leaves a few open questions. First, is there a right way or a right approach to configuring Apricot? And what considerations should be made when designing an Apricot system? We also hear from our clients the same type of question. How are other organizations like ours using Apricot, and are there any use cases I can draw on as examples? These are all really good questions to be asking because Apricot system design is something you do want to get right. To begin this conversation, we really need to talk about addressing the steps that are going to help you design the right Apricot system. At Sidekick Solutions, we emphasize intentional system design. Although our blueprinting methods for an Apricot system aren't the only way to map out an Apricot platform, here are our recommended steps to validate any of your Apricot system designs. First, define your workflow, either using diagrams or a bullet point list. Once you have that in place, you'll also want to draft or conduct an inventory of your reporting requirements, generally as narratives or some kind of written out format. From there, you'll have basically enough information to start a form and link blueprint using either an ERD, and we'll talk about that in a second, or a spreadsheet to map out your forms. With that spreadsheet, you can draft your field blueprints on each form. We generally recommend that you don't do this on paper forms. And then you can validate your form and link and field blueprints against your report narratives to round out. Now, this process doesn't need to be followed to the letter, but the principle is still important. We're validating our design assumptions before a build using both workflow and reporting requirements in some kind of form, link, field blueprint. Using this method lets us take a look at our configuration options before we start to build an actual Apricot database. So the first step of that process is to map out your workflow. Apricot designs for case management vary from organization to organization because the workflow and report requirements vary from organization to organization. However, a mapping process can still help you take the next step. Generally, we're going to find a workflow that looks something like this. A client will start as an inquiry or a referral to your program. There will be some kind of interview, intake, or eligibility procedure before they enroll in the program. You may conduct initial assessments before they transition into participation in the program, like services, activities, attendance referrals, service plans, or even logging goals. And then at the end, they'll take a final assessment, exit, and discharge. You may even have follow-ups scheduled post-discharge. Broadly, most case management systems want to report on the following things: historical participation by some demographic categories, participation of clients by total duration and their exit reason. You may also be interested in goal achievement and progress made by client in domain areas. A lot of programs will also conduct a pre-post status at enrollment and exit. And then we're also logging services and potentially correlating service effort and input against quantitative evaluations of pre-post progress through enrollment. When we translate the workflow and report requirements into blueprint, it might look something like this. We might have a blueprint showing our Tier 1 and Tier 2 forms in Apricot, along with the linking relationships between those forms. Or we might look to an entity relationship diagram, or an ERD, to map out the forms and relationships between the forms in a visual way. Once we have the forms and links in place, we might transition to field blueprinting, which identifies the data elements that exist on each form and each link. And in total, that can sum up a blueprint for your Apricot system before you build. Now, 2 quick points. I'm sharing these blueprint options not as something that you have to follow perfectly, but again, as a way to have something actionable that you can take with you, and also a solution that you can lean into before you start building forms in Apricot. Again, we're advocates for intentional design, and we feel like mapping things out ahead of time is a good way to do that. Now from here, I want to cover 3 use cases in the design of a case management application in Apricot and how they might be relevant to your program. And those 3 things are the program enrollment form, goal tracking, and a client summary report. At the end, we'll also do kind of a grab bag of other items to consider when you're building a case management database. Let's start with the program enrollment form. So what is the program enrollment form? The program enrollment form is a Tier 2 form under a client Tier 1 that generally carries the following base information: the program we're enrolling in, the staff that's assigned to that individual, the start and end dates of enrollment, potentially the location or site that they exist in, and then exit reasons and exit dates associated with their discharge. In total, the program enrollment tracks a person's current and historical status in a program, as well as the enrollment duration. This record would be updated once at enrollment and once at exit, unless the enrollment was otherwise reassigned during the active enrollment and we had to change the staff assigned field. In my opinion, the program enrollment form is the most important form in any Apricot system. Now, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, that's true. The program enrollment form tracks current status. The program enrollment with a start date and no end date is active, meaning they have not discharged, and can be used to track active caseload and program rosters. That's helpful for real-time reporting. The program enrollment form also tracks historical participation. A program enrollment with an end date was previously enrolled but is no longer active. And for as long as your database is in place, it will hold that value regardless of when you run a report. We call this a frozen in time, or locking your data in time. That's great for tracking and reporting on who participated in a date range in a particular program. The program enrollment form also organizes activities or participation by program. Services, assessments, other activities can get grouped under that program for drill down reporting because they can link back to the program enrollment form, and we'll talk about that configuration in a little bit. That means you're capable of reporting globally by client or specifically by program. And that's helpful if clients cross programs and you need to track continuity of service. Now, given the importance of the program enrollment form to the health of your database and the accuracy of your reports, we highly recommend creating a universal enrollment form, not an enrollment form per program. Some might refer to this as universal intake or a no wrong door approach, but the principle is the same. The goal is for all programs in your organization to use the same forms and workflow in Apricot, but differentiate the records by a program indicator using the program enrollment record. Again, like any design choice in Apricot, because it's highly customizable, this is not always the case. Having all programs run a program enrollment form is not ideal for a program where a participant may only enroll once. But for the most part, when designing a case management system, a universal program enrollment form will do your system well. And here's some reasons why. A universal enrollment form allows you to track multiple and repeat enrollments for the same participant, track and then report on continuity of service if a client moves across program. You can report globally across the entire organization with specific reporting and filtering by program. You can also provide operational consistency so users follow the same path every time in Apricot. That can be helpful to address your user learning curve. The program enrollment form also allows for unlimited scalability to add or remove programs without re-implementing your Apricot. This allows you to build new reports or keep data in current locations while you expand and contract the number of programs you offer at any one time. The quick test of whether you need a program enrollment form is if your clients can enroll in more than one program at a time or repeat an enrollment in a single program. If that's the case, the accuracy of your reports will most certainly depend on a program enrollment form. So how do we implement a universal enrollment form configuration in Apricot? Universal enrollment systems are supported by form logic, potentially dynamic fields and queries if you're using Apricot 360, and enrollment supplements. This is how you're going to get all of your program workflows running through the same form in Apricot. What you'll find is that if you are running a universal enrollment, some of your programs may not follow the same workflow or may have different conditions for data entry than other programs, and you'll need to display and hide information relative to each program as your user walks through that workflow. So for example, we can use form logic on the enrollment itself to hide, require, and shape data entry based on the program that's selected. We can also use form logic on the forms linked to an enrollment by auto-populating the program value to a linked tier 2 and using form logic off that auto-populate value. We can also use dynamic dropdowns or lookup lists to populate values and dropdowns for a particular program. An example of this would be if I'm in program A, only show in Apricot a service list on the service form relative to program A. Don't show the service list relative to program B. And then we can also use enrollment supplements as additional forms to capture program-specific data that otherwise can't fit on the enrollment form itself. Now I'm throwing a lot of ideas at you about program enrollments, but I want to look into this enrollment supplements concept with a little bit more depth and do a demo in Apricot about this concept. Enrollment supplements are worth highlighting here because it meets the best of two worlds. You get a universal enrollment form and also program specificity. So Apricot systems are often modeled after a program's paper forms. That means that each program probably has a separate intake form or some variations. As a result, there can be some friction when we combine these separate intake forms into a separate workflow in Apricot. The users across these various programs can often complain about the data entry because it may feel either too specific and not relevant to their program, or too diluted, meaning it's not specific enough to their program. That's where the enrollment supplement comes into play. And how this works is we actually have our program enrollment form as a tier 2 form, and we use a wizard link with a one-to-one relationship to create an enrollment supplement form for a particular program. This is a separate form with a wizard link. It's a one-to-one link, so the supplement is an extension of the enrollment, and we enforce data quality. And because of that one-to-one link, it ensures that we do not get multiple enrollments of the same record in a report. We don't get any duplication. So let's go ahead and take a look at this in Apricot. So I'm going to go to my standard forms, and then I'm going to open up my program enrollment and exit form. And you'll see that I have my enrollment supplement relative to the case management program. This is a linking field in a one-to-one relationship with a wizard link style turned on with same folder linking. And how I've presented this is that I've hidden the section with the supplement in it until the program enrolling field matches case management. So I have a form logic condition, program enrolling matches case management, unhide the case management supplement section. The case management supplement record is actually another form in the Tier 1 document folder. You can see that it's separate from the program enrollment and exit. It is a completely separate form, Tier 2 form, with additional information related to the case management program. If I had other supplements for other programs, I could create multiple links, one for each program, or I could use form logic on the wizard linked record to create all of the supplements on the same form. So you may be asking, why are you splitting out this as a separate form? And the reason is that often these supplements get very long. They may have 100 or maybe just shy of 100 fields on them. And if that's the case, it's best to split these off into separate forms to ensure that Apricot loads quickly and creates a seamless user experience. Let's jump into the front end and take a look at how this might work from the enrollment supplement view. Let's say that I am enrolling this individual in the case management program. You'll notice that I've hidden the case management supplement from the document folder. It is not visible because it's wizard linked from the program enrollment record. So I'll create a new program enrollment and exit, and I'll enroll in the case management program. That opens the case management supplement where I can create via wizard link this supplement record. Fill out some required fields here. And you can see that the enrollment supplement is now appended to this program enrollment. Now again, because I have the linking field set to a one-to-one relationship, that means that I can only have one case management supplement per enrollment. In so doing, that enforces in reporting that this is a direct extension of the program enrollment form and will not cause duplication. Now, some programs, and you might be wondering how enrollments work with these programs, some programs are activity-based. You might have a resource and referral coordination program, potentially an emergency assistance or prevention program, or some one-time attendance program that doesn't have an enrollment duration. It's more transactional. Those types of services do not need program enrollments, and this is a good use case for when you might not use an enrollment record to signify someone's participation in the program. And the reason you don't need an enrollment record in these scenarios is that these scenarios don't carry duration. There isn't a start date and end date. There's only the date of the activity that was completed. In fact, asking staff to complete enrollments for these one-time services can be time-consuming and burdensome. If you do offer these types of services, we still want to keep universal systems and shared resources where we can. For example, we may still want to count all referrals, whether they're enrolled or not. You don't want to create two referral forms, one for enrolled participants and one for non-enrolled participants. Instead, you can use form logic to require the program enrollment link when enrolled and hide the program enrollment link when not enrolled. So you'll notice here in this screenshot that you have a referral, a date of assistance. When it's not enrolled, the enrollment link does not show up. But when they are enrolled, the enrollment link shows up and correlates this referral back to the original enrollment record. So that's a way that you can handle both a resource and referral that's one time versus a resource and referral that might happen under a duration-based case management program. So the next use case related to case management that I want to cover is goals. Now, Apricot is a business application. So by default, it wants to live in a quantitative world. And the question becomes, how do we capture the qualitative components of our services like goals and goal progress in a database application like Apricot? In our experience, there are levels of goal tracking, and how you want to report on goals and determines which method you should use. Those levels are listed here. There are assessments of standard goals pre-post, status at closure, active status as of today, and progress over time. I call them levels because as you move up a level, the sophistication of the system grows, as does the commitment towards data entry. Before we get into each level, there are two principles to consider when tracking qualitative goals. First, we need a place to put goals. For the most part, except for level 1, and more on that in a little bit when we look at some use cases, goals are something we want to count. As a result, a goal must be its own thing in Apricot, that thing we want to count. That implies that a goal must be its own form and record. If we're going to enter many goals into Apricot, 2, 5, 10, or more, a case manager needs a central location to manage those goals. While we could manage those goals from the document folder, go into the document folder, as records in the document folder, we do recommend linking goals to a service plan or a case plan instead of from the document folder because it lets you track narratives in your Apricot for reference. You can create a primary point of entry for goals, and you can track multiple plans per client that might have multiple goals per plan. Again, we generally don't recommend the document folder for goals because goals can mix together and be difficult to manage, especially as you queue up many goals in the document folder. So I'll show you an example. This ISP has a wizard link to create one or many goals. And as we create goals, they queue up on this plan. and create a centralized location and a launching point for us to organize and manage our case plan. So where we place goals is one decision. The second decision is if we're going to be counting goals, we need meaningful ways to count them. We need a way to transform subjective goals into countable metrics, and to do that, we recommend using outcome and domain areas. So the recommendation is to use some kind of qualifier on these goals to identify how they relate to either domains or outcome areas, your logic model, or your theory of change. Status and text boxes aren't enough. You may also want to qualify goals within a particular category so that you can count them and aggregate them in reports. Now let's look at each goal tracking option. Before we jump on, let's take one final look at this outcome and domain area concept. We do have an ERD here. You can see that an individual service plan relates to a goal, many goals to a service plan, and you could either by linking or potentially by dynamic field, if you have Apricot 360, you could create dynamic drop-downs of outcomes and domain areas, which can also relate to milestones, to roll up goals in reporting. Now, if you don't have Apricot 360, you could also use a standard drop-down field to signify your outcome and domain area. What's useful about dynamic fields is that if you have a particular program that works with a certain set of domains that's different than another program, the dynamic drop-downs can enforce that logic in real time. All right, so now let's take a look at goal tracking. So first, goal tracking level 1, which is more of an assessment of pre-post. This is something where you could track a goal assessment on the enrollment and have a pre and post goal assessment. So in this case, achieve stable employment pre, achieve stable employment post. You can use this when you only need a pre and post evaluation on a standard set of program goals for all clients, meaning it's not custom by client. And you can add this to the enrollment and exit form to simplify reporting and only place there if there's a handful of standard goals. Generally, we're going to find that this is very lightweight, and most organizations that are running some kind of case management program need the ability to create a subjective goal narrative related to a domain that is not standard per client, because we want to meet all clients where they're at. So the second is more along those lines. Level 2 is a status at closure. We would add new goals as service progress, and then indicate achievement or non-achievement of the goal at closure only. Since the goals are evaluated at closure, these are best linked to an enrollment, so the exit and goal tracking are in the same place. So instead of linking to the individual service plan, you could actually link the goals directly to the enrollment form. It's a great way to streamline navigation so that users only evaluate goal progress at closure. The met, not met status of a goal can be a simple radio button on each goal. And again, because you're only tracking at closure, you just make a met, not met evaluation. But this would be a separate goal record in Apricot for each goal that you set. An alternative to tracking only at closure is to do goal tracking as a current status or an active status. This is similar to status at closure, except we are also tracking interim status, possibly with reports. Goals should be linked to a service plan or a case plan like we talked about, and goal status should include met, not met, and potentially an in-process status, or a list of milestones towards completion and non-completion. This is a popular form of goal tracking because you can aggregate a full profile of goals for a single client in real time, rather than only evaluating goals at closure. The final solution in level 4 is to track goal progress. This is what we would call met, not met, in process, and a status of change over time. This method is the most difficult to implement because the data entry requirement on end users is quite significant. Like in level 3, we're tracking each goal as its own record, but in addition to the goal record, we're also logging individual goal progress records at each check-in interval. So for example, you may have 3 goals, and every 30 days you may evaluate the goal status as a status of change in that goal by adding one goal progress record to each goal. So every time you evaluate 3 goals, you would add 3 progress records. Again, the burden of data entry goes up significantly when we talk about level 4 and tracking goal progress. However, this is the concept of tracking progress over time. So if you want to chart progress in a goal or domain area over time, level 4 is your solution. There is one methodology that merges level 1 and level 2 that I left out of this presentation, and we call this method field sets. If your program tracks custom goals and you want the simplicity of level 1, but the detail of level 2, field sets might be attractive. Now, before you go this route, you need to be aware of the following potential pitfalls. Number 1, let's just first talk about what field sets are. Field sets is the creation of a field set, a combination of fields numbered on potentially an enrollment record or a treatment plan. So for example, if you had 5 goals, you'd have 5 field sets on the enrollment form. If you had the potential for 6 goals, you'd have 6 field sets. Now that inherently identifies one major limitation of this model. If you have 7, 8, 9, 10, or more goals, you're out of luck. You either have to track those goals in an external system, or you'll have to overwrite one of the previous 5, 6, or 7 goals, depending on how many field sets you have. So that's the primary limitation. You're limited by the number of goal sets on a form. The other limitations relate to reporting. Because these field sets are identifying columns, counting goals by columns instead of by rows, you'll need custom expressions or Apricot results reporting in order to produce meaningful counts of reports in your Apricot platform. Custom expressions and Apricot results are only available in Apricot 360, and therefore it's not recommended to create goal field sets in an Apricot Core or Essentials platform. Even within an Apricot 360 platform, we would not recommend using field sets for goal tracking. And there are, again, a number of reasons why. And it's primarily because the workflow in Apricot enables the creation of multiple goals. As we talked about earlier, you can use wizard links, separate records, links to enrollments and service plans that organize goals in a meaningful way that doesn't get you caught in this trap of field sets. To be honest, we have implemented field sets before. It is rare that we recommend it, but it's important to just keep in mind this concept of field sets, and if you start leaning that direction, to think through your reporting requirements very clearly. So the third major use case in this presentation is the client summary report. This isn't a form-based configuration. This is actually a report configuration. Apricot reports arrange and present data differently than forms. Although you can look through form data to find information on a client or a volunteer or a service provider, that data may not be organized in a way that's helpful. So let me just give you an example. If I'm navigating in Apricot, in order to find information about the profile, I have to go to the profile. Or I have to ensure that there's enough quick view information to support the overview tab. If I'm interested in service history or goals or program enrollments, I have to look through all of the records in the document folder. It can be a challenge for a case manager to stitch together all of the information across all of these locations. The good news is that Apricot can create custom views of this information in reports, and a common user report that we often build in systems that helps to consolidate all of this information is a client summary report. And the reason we create client summary reports is that your case managers might be asking questions like, what service has a client received to date? Or have any referrals been made to other agencies? You might also want to see all of the goals and their status in one place. Or you may want to find out if other case managers have been involved with the client to date. You may also be curious what the outcome of the first 5 contacts were made with that client, because that may have something to do with program fidelity in your logic model. Diving through a client's document folder to answer those questions is tedious and time-consuming, and using the Tier 1 search isn't ideal either. So instead, we create a single view with the client summary report. And the client summary report has become one of the most popular reports for our clients because it puts all this stuff together. Another word or another term for the client summary report would be calling it a printout, a profile, or a facesheet report. In total, it's going to summarize and aggregate a client's history into a single view. And because this report's so popular, I want to demo it for you today on this video and show you some of the key conditions that go into designing it. So I'm going to navigate to my client summary report, and I'm going to run this. Now, you could put this on the home screen as a clickable button in a bulletin. You could select this button here and open up the client summary report. You could also expose it in a user's My Reports section. Lots of ways to deploy this solution to make it easy to get at. But when a user accesses this report, the hardest part about getting this report is to get the actual one single client that you want. So we build a filter combination that searches for a client. So let's say Anita. And in this first section, we'll see all of the Anita records that are available. So let me give you another example. Let's say I just search test. You can see there are many test records in my system, all with a different record ID. The thing that we want in order to run this report is the record ID for the Tier 1 client profile. In this case for Anita, it's 7214. So I'll enter that record ID and refresh the report, and this report will populate with all of Anita's details. We'll see the demographics laid out in a vertical format. This is great for printing. Contact information, a history of enrollments, the programs, and the exit reasons. Goals by status. Self-sufficiency progress over time in different domains. So income, employment, shelter, food and life skills, or all at the same time. And we can also see pre and post enrollment status by that goal indicator we talked about earlier of achieving stable employment. And we can see going from a 1 to a 2. Now, the client summary report could be much larger than this. You may want more information around service history, potentially other information, more assessments and evaluations, potentially even goal progress. And all of that can be put into one report, which can then be printed or exported. You could save this to a PDF. A really great way to do this would be to expand all data. And now I have one page per section as a printable report. Which could be taken to a supervisory session with a case manager or any other number of uses, but this creates a face sheet for an individual. Now on the back end, this report is developed primarily by filtering every single section by the record ID. That's how we build this report. And the search section up here is based on a filter combination that uses these global values right here. Again, the goal is to get a single Tier 1 client or participant profile by the record ID. By filtering down to one individual, you're able to display the information for just that individual and keep this report focused as a face sheet and a client summary sheet for that individual. Although we don't have enough time to cover an entire case management system end to end, I do want to offer some additional options to consider when you're building your own systems. These are all kind of quick hit grab bag ideas to chew on and let you think about as you design your own system in Apricot. The first is referrals or inquiries. There is an opportunity using web forms and intake forms, potentially even using the Connect module in Apricot Core and Apricot 360 to accept referrals into your program or inquiries into your programs from external sources. Those can be queued up as separate tier 1s from a client profile, or they could create the client profile directly. This can be helpful to track conversion from initial contact to enrollment. You can also keep this queue of prospective clients to identify who enrolls versus those that don't. One of the key metrics that we often see as a need is whether or not clients actually engage in programs from which they are referred or to which they inquire. You can also accept inquiries and referrals online to reduce staff data entry. This could also be used to process applications. If you have students or school-aged youth or people who need to apply to a particular program, you could use these web forms and deployable online solutions for people to submit information to Apricot directly. Some key decisions on whether or not to use referrals or inquiries is whether or not you have enough information at referral. Do you want to accept new clients online? And does everyone that contacts you get enrolled? And if the answer is yes or no to those questions, you might want to create a separate queue of inquiries or referrals into Apricot before you create and enroll a client in your program. Some other solutions to consider revolve around service tracking. Service tracking can be used to count by service type and total time. You can identify service effort by aggregating time against particular service type values. Service type records are also flexible to expand for any service using a universal methodology. You could filter the service drop-down list by a particular program using form logic or dynamic queries in Apricot 360. You also have some key decisions around tracking services of whether or not you want to track services on a single form or if you want to track multiple services per form. One of the things that we often get asked is whether or not we can track multiple services on a service record. So if I go to a service record in my Apricot system, you'll notice that this record has a drop-down for type of service and then a single numeric value for minutes. The question we get asked is, can I track multiple services per entry? And the answer is yes, and also no. The decision to track multiple service types per entry depends on how you've configured your Apricot. If you're interested in tracking the total time per service, you need an exclusive choice or drop-down for the type of service. If you only care about the total time per activity, and that activity may include a mix of services, a checkbox may be appropriate. However, in using checkboxes, you do need to be careful in whether or not you use a checkbox field or a linking or dynamic checkbox field. If you intend to report on the count of services per service type, you'll need to consider using a linking field or a dynamic checkbox when you deploy a multi-service service record. There's another kind of referral that you may want to track in Apricot. And when we work with new clients in Apricot, new users that are getting started with Apricot for the first time, we do often get asked, can we track the referrals we make to other agencies? And our answer is always yes, and you should. This is a great way to identify the mix of services that you're sending out of your organization to other agencies and identifying whether or not your clients actually make the connection and enroll in those services. You can link referrals to partner programs for clear reporting. So you can actually create a directory of partner agencies and link them to the referrals that you're making, and that can improve data quality and reporting. You can also track follow-ups, status, and outcome of a referral. So if I have a referral as a Tier 2 record under a client profile, I can track the status of that referral, which can help me understand whether or not my clients are actually making it to some particular outcome with that other organization. I can identify whether or not they met with that organization, whether or not they enrolled, whether they successfully completed services or terminated services. And this can help me make smarter decisions about not only who we refer to, but which programs are best suited for the type of need that a client has. You can start to use Apricot to make prescriptive or even heavily data-informed decisions about where to send clients in your community. To consider is how you design case notes. Case notes and services could potentially be merged onto a single form, and the reason you might consider that is you can create a single history within that Tier 2 document stack across both notes and services. This is helpful if you're in Apricot and want to look at a client's document folder and see a full history of interaction and activity with a particular client or participant in one stack. So even if you're not providing a service, you could log case notes as a service record or make this a service/note record to get that single stack and history of activity. Some other options that you might consider is adding a wizard link as a follow-up record, potentially to the bottom of a referral form or at enrollment. If you're ever making any follow-ups with an individual, maybe at discharge or after discharge, or if you're following up on a referral, that wizard link could be used to log a note right from the record you're on instead of navigating back to the document folder. Again, the benefit of consolidating notes and services or activities into a single form is that you can report on all of them in the same stack using Apricot native reports, and that can be a helpful tool for you to use in tracking a history of one client. The final kind of quick hit solution that you might consider is around Apricot case management design are assessments, evaluations, and screenings. Now we have a separate webinar on assessment scales and scoring. We'll link that webinar in this video's summary and notes, so you have an ability to watch that. There are a lot of decisions to be made around assessments, and it really all revolves around reporting decisions and whether or not you intend to report on Apricot assessments, screenings, or evaluations in native reports, or if you intend to use the Apricot results SAP Business Objects in Webby solution, which is only available in Apricot 360. Again, I'll point you to our webinar on assessment, scales, and scoring to dive more into those solutions. Now, I mentioned earlier I could continue on this topic for hours because there's so many neat designs worth noting and use cases in Apricot. But I would like to quickly summarize a couple of key points to keep this actionable for you. So here's what I hope you might take away from this video. Number one, a universal enrollment is a must-have for long-term success and the ability to scale your Apricot with more programs. Number two, select a goal tracking method, but be realistic with what it requires. Keep in mind that as you elevate in each level of goal tracking, there's more data entry and reporting that's required of you to make your Apricot worthwhile. Number three, develop a client summary report to reinforce program goals. Your case managers, or the people who are delivering services and the face of your organization to clients, need information to make decisions on next steps, whether that's treatment planning or developing individual service plans, putting together new goals, or even just identifying what to do next. A client summary report can help expose and surface information in your Apricot to help those workers make smarter decisions on the front lines. And number four, always be intentional with any configuration choices. We talked at the beginning of this video about blueprinting, and we strongly advocate for thinking through solutions before you build them to keep the impact on your overall Apricot system low. So that concludes this video. To learn more about Apricot, you can explore our YouTube channel or visit our website. Also, if you like our approach to Apricot and would like to work with us, you can send us an email at info@sidekicksolutionsllc.com. Our door is always open. Thank you for watching.